At what point does bad football stop looking like incompetence and start feeling like something else entirely? That's the question blowing up across social media right now after yet another brutal loss by the Cleveland Browns. Because this wasn't just another game where things didn't bounce their way. This was a game where certain moments looked so wrong on tape that fans couldn't ignore them anymore. Week after week, the same issues keep popping up. Missed blocks, free rushers, protection breaking down at the worst possible times. And somehow the same player keeps taking the hit, Shedeur Sanders. That's why a lot of fans aren't just angry anymore. They're suspicious. Online, people are starting to connect dots. They're going back to training camp stories. Reports that Shedeur wasn't getting real reps early. Rumors that he was practicing away from the main group. At the time, most people brushed it off as normal rookie treatment. But now, with the way games are unfolding on Sundays, those old stories are being looked at very differently. To be clear, there's no proof of intentional wrongdoing. This is fan speculation, fueled by frustration and repeated visuals that don't add up. But perception matters, especially when the same breakdowns keep happening and the same explanations keep coming from the podium. When fans watch a fourth and short play where protection collapses instantly, they don't hear execution issue. They hear alarms. And the silence around accountability only makes it louder. Every time Kevin Stefanski talks about liking the process, while the tape shows obvious failures, trust erodes a little more. Fans aren't asking for miracles. They're asking for honesty, for someone to look at what everyone else sees and call it what it is. Because here's the uncomfortable part. When effort from the quarterback is obvious, when analysts praise his poise and toughness, and the offense still keeps breaking down in the same way, people start wondering who's really failing him. Is it just bad football, poor coaching, weak roster construction, or is something deeper going on inside this building? That's why this conversation isn't going away. The sabotagers, real or imagined, are being exposed in the court of public opinion. And once fans start using that word, the situation has already crossed a dangerous line. Because now, every missed block isn't just a mistake. It's a question mark. The sabotage conversation didn't come out of nowhere. It didn't start with one blown block or one bad play call. It started months ago, quietly, during moments most fans didn't think much about at the time. But now, those moments are being replayed in people's minds with a very different tone. Early in training camp, there were whispers about how Shedeur Sanders was being handled. Reports and fan observations suggested he wasn't consistently getting reps with the main offensive unit. Instead, there were claims he was working on side fields, throwing to non-starters, and being kept away from meaningful chemistry-building situations. At the time, it was brushed off as rookie treatment or part of a long-term plan. But as the season has unfolded, those early decisions are being revisited. Fans are now connecting that early separation to what they're seeing on Sundays. Missed protections, timing issues, receivers and linemen seemingly out of sync with the quarterback. And when those same problems show up week after week, people stop believing it's coincidence. That's when speculation fills the gap. To be clear, there is no confirmed evidence that anyone inside the organization is intentionally undermining the quarterback. This narrative lives in the realm of fan speculation and online debate. But speculation doesn't appear in a vacuum. It forms when actions don't line up with explanations, and when accountability feels absent. What made the narrative grow was the lack of visible correction. When a young quarterback struggles early, fans expect to see structural support increase, better protection, simplified reads, safer play calls. Instead, many feel Shedeur was placed in high-risk situations behind unstable protection, often in moments where failure felt inevitable. That contrast fueled suspicion. And then came the body language moments. Clips circulated showing linemen missing assignments, plays where pressure arrived untouched, situations where effort looked questionable at best. On their own, Those moments could be chalked up to bad football, but stacked together, they created a pattern that fans couldn't ignore. The reaction toward Kevin Stefanski intensified because he never publicly acknowledged any internal disconnect. He defended the process. He praised effort. He framed breakdowns as execution issues. And while that may be true internally, it didn't match what fans felt they were seeing with their own eyes. That disconnect is where the sabotage narrative truly took root. Not because people want drama, but because when repeated failures surround one player and explanations never evolve, fans start looking for answers elsewhere. Fair or not, speculation becomes the outlet. And once a fan base starts asking whether a quarterback is being put in a position to fail, the conversation changes permanently. From that point on, every missed block isn't just a mistake. It's a clue, at least in the eyes of those already losing trust. And that's how this narrative began. This was the play that pushed a lot of fans over the edge, not because it failed, but because of how it failed. Late in the game, in a critical fourth-and-short situation, the Cleveland Browns lined up with a chance to keep the drive alive. Momentum was fragile. The margin for error was gone, and what happened next instantly became one of the most replayed clips of the week. At the snap, the protection collapsed almost immediately. Not after the quarterback held the ball too long, not because the route took forever to develop. It collapsed instantly. A defender came through untouched, blowing up the play before Shedeur Sanders had any realistic chance to operate. When fans slowed the tape down, one name kept coming up: Cam Robinson. On replay, the assignment breakdown looked glaring. Instead of engaging the rusher with leverage and urgency, Robinson appeared flat-footed, almost passive, allowing pressure straight through the gap. The defender didn't have to fight through contact. He wasn't chipped. He wasn't redirected. He was barely slowed down. In a must-have situation, the quarterback was left exposed. That's when the conversation changed. This wasn't a subtle misstep or a losing rep against elite talent. To many fans, it looked obvious. Too obvious, especially on fourth down when effort and execution are supposed to be at their highest. Online, people started asking uncomfortable questions. How does that happen in that moment? Why does the protection fail that cleanly? To be clear, there is no verified evidence that the play was intentionally blown. This is fan interpretation and speculation, fueled by frustration and repeated visuals. But what made this play explode online was context. This wasn't the first time Shedeur faced instant pressure. It wasn't the first time protection failed in a crucial spot. It was just the clearest example. Analysts broke it down frame by frame. You could see Shedeur's drop barely begin before the defender arrived. No pocket, no escape lane, no chance. That's why many fans didn't even blame the result of the play, they blamed the setup. In their eyes, the quarterback was put in a no-win situation. And when the coaching staff later defended the call and the process, that only intensified the backlash. Because fans weren't questioning whether the team should go for it. They were questioning why the quarterback wasn't protected when they did. This single snap became symbolic, not just of one lineman's mistake, but of a larger fear that when the game is on the line, the structure around the quarterback keeps failing him. Fair or not, that's why this play is still being talked about. Because once fans believe a quarterback is being hung out to dry in the biggest moments, every future breakdown gets viewed through that same lens. And after this fourth down play, that lens became impossible to ignore. Once fans moved past that fourth down snap, something unsettling happened. They kept seeing the same thing show up over and over again on film. Not once, not twice, but throughout the game. And that's when frustration started turning into full-blown disbelief. The Cleveland Browns' offensive line didn't just struggle. It repeatedly broke down in ways that felt avoidable. Free rushers coming through untouched, linemen engaging the wrong defender, others barely engaging anyone at all. These weren't elite pass rush wins where a defender simply outplayed his man. These were protection failures that looked structural. And when you slow the tape down, that distinction matters. On multiple snaps, Shedeur Sanders barely finished his drop before pressure arrived. No pocket to step into, no edge sealed, no interior resistance, just immediate chaos. That forces a quarterback into survival mode, scrambling, throwing off platform, or taking hits that should never happen at this level. Fans started pointing out something else that made it even more alarming: effort, or at least what looked like a lack of urgency. On some plays, linemen appeared upright and reactive instead of aggressive. Hands late, feet stagnant, assignments missed in a way that didn't resemble normal NFL mistakes. It didn't look like players getting beaten. It looked like players not arriving. Now, it's important to be clear. There is no confirmed proof of intentional wrongdoing. No evidence that anyone is deliberately allowing pressure. What fans are reacting to is appearance. And appearance becomes powerful when the same visual keeps repeating. That's why the word sabotage started spreading online. Not as a proven claim, but as an emotional reaction to patterns that didn't make sense. Because when protection fails once, it's football. When it fails consistently, especially in critical moments, people start asking why corrections aren't happening. What made it worse was the timing. These breakdowns didn't just occur on random early downs. They showed up on third downs, on fourth downs, in high-leverage situations where protection should be simplified and reinforced. That's where fans expect max protection looks, quick concepts, or at least awareness of pressure. Too often, they saw none of that. Analysts who reviewed the game echoed a similar sentiment. Shedeur wasn't playing behind a bad, offensive line. He was playing behind an unpredictable one. And that's far more dangerous. You can adapt to losing matchups. You can't adapt when pressure arrives from places it shouldn't. That's why this section of the conversation refuses to die. Because even critics of Shedeur admit something feels off. He's being forced to compensate for mistakes that shouldn't be his responsibility. And when a young quarterback keeps absorbing hits behind broken structure, development becomes secondary to survival. At some point, fans stopped asking, "Why is Shedeur holding the ball?" and started asking, "Why is nobody in front of him?" And once that question takes hold, trust erodes fast. Because quarterbacks can fix mechanics, they can speed up reads, they can learn coverages. But no quarterback can succeed if the protection in front of him keeps disappearing on tape. This is where the narrative starts to crack, because when you isolate the quarterback play from everything collapsing around it, Shedeur Sanders doesn't look overwhelmed. He looks tested, and there's a big difference. From the opening drive, Shedeur was operating in survival mode. The pocket wasn't clean. Timing windows closed fast. Pressure showed up early and often. And yet, instead of panicking or forcing reckless throws, he adapted. You could see it in his footwork. His eyes stayed up. His movement wasn't frantic, it was deliberate. Sliding, stepping up, escaping just enough to keep plays alive. What stood out most was how physical the game became for him. He took hits that would rattle veteran quarterbacks. He absorbed contact while delivering throws. At one point, he even left briefly with a finger injury, the kind of thing that usually derails a young passer's rhythm. But when he came back in, nothing changed. Same posture, same confidence, same willingness to stand in and compete. Against a defense like the Buffalo Bills, that matters. This isn't a unit that gives quarterbacks time to think. They disguise pressure, close gaps quickly, and punish hesitation. And still, Shedeur found ways to manufacture offense. Not by chasing hero plays, but by taking what the defense gave him, extending when necessary, and keeping drives from completely dying. That's why analysts who focused on the tape, not just the box score, came away impressed. His mobility wasn't flashy, it was functional. His scrambling wasn't random, it was situational. He wasn't running to pad stats. He was running to survive broken plays that shouldn't have been broken in the first place. Even Kevin Stefanski acknowledged Shedeur's toughness and playmaking with his legs after the game. And while that praise may feel hollow to some fans given everything else, it still matters, because it confirms what the tape shows. The quarterback didn't fold under pressure. What makes this section so important is context. This wasn't a game where the offense was schemed to protect a young passer. This was chaos layered on top of adversity, injuries, protection breakdowns, momentum swings. And through it all, Shedeur kept the Browns competitive. That doesn't mean he played a perfect game. He didn't. There were throws he'd want back, reads he'll learn from. But that's development, not failure, especially when the environment around him is unstable. The key takeaway isn't that Shedeur carried the team. It's that he didn't become the reason they lost. In a game where so many things went wrong, that alone says a lot. Because when a quarterback shows poise while everything around him is breaking down, evaluators notice, teammates notice, and fans, even the angry ones, notice too. This wasn't a quarterback shrinking under pressure. This was a quarterback learning how to function inside it. This is where the conversation stops being emotional and starts becoming unavoidable. Because once fans moved past the offensive line breakdowns and replayed the tape again, the focus shifted squarely to the sideline, and specifically to Kevin Stefanski. The biggest issue wasn't going for it. Most fans actually agreed with the aggression. Against a team like the Buffalo Bills, you're not going to win by playing scared. The issue was how the aggression was executed, the play design, the protection call, the lack of contingency when pressure predictably arrived. On that critical fourth down snap, there was no built-in safety valve, no extra protection, no quick developing option to neutralize pressure. Instead, Shedeur Sanders was asked to operate behind a protection look that had already failed earlier in the game. That's not just risky, that's repeating a mistake in the most important moment. And when Stefanski was asked about it afterward, his response is what really poured fuel on the fire. He defended the process, said he liked the call, said the team needed to be aggressive, said execution was the issue. For a portion of the fan base, that answer felt disconnected from reality. Because when the structure of a play gives your quarterback no realistic chance to succeed, execution stops being the only problem. Fans weren't asking for scapegoats. They were asking for acknowledgement. Why wasn't protection adjusted? Why wasn't the play simplified? Why wasn't the quarterback put in a position where a single missed block wouldn't instantly end the drive? Those questions never got answered directly, and that's where trust eroded even further. What made it worse is that this wasn't an isolated decision. After the opening script, the offense once again looked disjointed. Drive sequencing stalled. Adjustments felt late. The game plan didn't seem to evolve as pressure mounted. When things worked early, they weren't leaned into. When things failed, they weren't corrected quickly enough. That pattern is what has fans uneasy. Coaches earn grace when mistakes are followed by visible correction. But when the same types of failures repeat, especially in high-leverage moments, fans start believing the staff either doesn't see the problem or refuses to address it publicly. Neither option inspires confidence. Online, the tone shifted from frustration to something sharper. People weren't just criticizing play calls anymore. They were questioning whether Stefanski still had a feel for his personnel, whether he truly understood what his quarterback was dealing with snap to snap, whether defending process had become a shield against accountability. This is the danger zone for any head coach. Because once fans stop believing that decisions are being made with the players instead of over them, patience disappears fast. And when your quarterback is clearly fighting through chaos, the expectation is that coaching should reduce that chaos, not compound it. That's why this section matters so much. It's not about one fourth down call. It's about a growing belief that the margin for error keeps shrinking and the coaching responses aren't adapting with it. And once that belief sets in, every future decision is judged through the same lens. Not what were they trying to do, but why didn't they protect their quarterback? This is where the conversation moves from anger to consequence. Because once fans start arguing about sabotage, real or perceived, it usually means they've lost confidence in how the roster itself is being built. And right now, the Cleveland Browns are staring straight at that problem. The injury to Quinshon Judkins didn't just hurt the offense in the moment. It exposed how fragile the entire structure really is. When your run game disappears, protection schemes get stressed. Defenses pin their ears back. And suddenly, every weakness along the offensive line gets amplified. That's exactly what happened, and fans noticed immediately. This is why draft talk exploded overnight. Instead of debating quarterbacks, the conversation flipped hard toward the trenches. Online, fans are openly saying there, no excuse for prioritizing anything other than offensive linemen early in the draft. Some are even arguing that multiple early picks should be dedicated to protection alone, not because skilled players aren't needed, but because none of it matters if the quarterback is constantly under siege. And that brings the focus back to Shedeur Sanders. Whether you believe the sabotage narrative or not, one thing is undeniable. The environment around him has been unstable. That instability fuels speculation. When fans see repeated protection failures, questionable assignments, and little visible correction, they don't just blame players, they blame roster construction. Who was signed? Who wasn't? Who's starting when they shouldn't be? Reports and fan discussions suggest the Browns could be holding multiple premium picks. If that's true, the pressure is enormous. Fans are already setting expectations. Fix the offensive line or admit you're not serious about developing your quarterback. Anything else will be seen as negligence. Some have floated wide receiver upgrades. Others mention adding depth across the line rather than chasing splash names. A few even argue that bringing in competition alone could change the culture up front. None of these ideas are official plans, they're fan-driven reactions, but they reflect a larger truth. Patience has expired. Because this isn't just about next season, it's about trust. If the Browns use valuable draft capital on positions that don't immediately protect the quarterback, the backlash will be intense. Fans will interpret it as proof that lessons weren't learned, that the same cycle is repeating, that development is being talked about, not prioritized. And that's the dangerous part. Quarterbacks don't develop in chaos forever. At some point, the organization has to choose, build a wall in front of him, or accept whatever damage follows. The draft represents that choice in the clearest way possible. That's why this section matters more than any individual play or press conference, because roster construction is where talk becomes action. And for the Browns, this upcoming draft may end up being the loudest answer they give all year, whether they intend it that way or not. At this point, the conversation around the Cleveland Browns has clearly crossed into a new phase. This is no longer just about a bad loss, a missed block, or a questionable play call. It's about trust, and whether the people watching still believe this organization is moving in the right direction. What makes this situation so volatile is the contrast. On one hand, you have Shedeur Sanders, a young quarterback taking hits, extending plays, playing through chaos, and showing clear signs of growth under pressure. Analysts, former players, and even opposing fans can see it on tape. The poise is there. The toughness is there. The ability to adapt is there. Whatever you think about his ceiling, it's hard to argue he isn't competing. On the other hand, you have an environment that feels unstable at best. Protection breakdowns that keep repeating. High-leverage moments where structure collapses. Explanations that lean on process, while fans are staring at tape that tells a different story. And once that disconnect sets in, everything gets questioned. That's why the sabotage narrative, fair or not, gained traction so fast. Not because fans want to believe something sinister is happening, but because repeated failure without visible correction forces people to search for answers. When mistakes keep happening in the same way and accountability feels vague, speculation fills the gap. That's human nature. This also puts enormous pressure on Kevin Stefanski and the leadership above him. At some point, defending the process stops working if the results and the visuals don't improve. Fans aren't asking for perfection. They're asking for alignment between what they're seeing on the field and what they're hearing afterward. The danger now is momentum in the wrong direction. Once fans believe a quarterback is being put in harm's way, physically or developmentally, patience disappears. Every missed block feels louder. Every coaching decision feels heavier. Every press conference gets dissected for what wasn't said instead of what was. And here's the reality the Browns can't escape. Quarterbacks don't get infinite grace in unstable environments. If the organization truly believes Shedeur is part of the future, then protecting him structurally, schematically, and culturally has to become non-negotiable. Not next year, not after another evaluation. Now. This isn't about declaring villains or proving intent. It's about recognizing that something fundamental has broken in the relationship between fans and the decision makers. Once that happens, silence and repetition only make it worse. A line has been crossed. The benefit of the doubt is gone. What happens next will determine whether this season is remembered as growing pains or as the moment when trust finally snapped.